Fourth commandment. So paragraph 141. In connection with this commandment, there is more to be said about the various kinds of obedience due our superiors, persons whose duty it is to command and govern. Out of the authority of parents, all other authority is derived and developed. Where a father is unable by himself to bring up his child, he calls upon a schoolmaster to teach him. If he's too weak, he enlists the help of friends and neighbors. If he passes away, he confers and delegates his authority and responsibility to others appointed for the purpose. That's a very important point that's easy to forget. Out of the authority of parents, all other authority derives. Government would not exist were it not for family. Government is not a thing unto itself. It derives its authority from parents. Schools derive their authority from parents. All a school really is parents telling someone, we want you to instruct our kids in these things. And when schools go beyond what they have a right to do, when they start dictating to us what they're going to teach our children, when their morals, their standards, their sense of right and wrong start to dominate, that's when we as parents need to speak up and make sure they understand their place in all of this. And we do have an issue with schools assuming they're the moral instructors of our children. They are not. We have opted out all of our kids from guidance counseling, and I'd suggest all of you to do the same. Because guidance counseling is so often where they get the liberal indoctrination. And there are certain classes, too, that we have excused the kids from. It is not anybody else's responsibility to teach moral right and wrong to children than parents. And even church. Parents delegate their authority to me as a pastor to teach confirmation to the kids, but really, spiritual instruction of your kids is not my job. That's your God-given duty to teach your children the faith. I can fill in the finer points of doctrine and such, but ultimately, I'm not going to be able to teach your children anything that you aren't teaching them at home. Your role as parent is huge before God. All other authority derives from you as parents. And don't be afraid to exert that authority and say, I'm the parent here. All too often, I think, people feel helpless at that. And I know we mentioned last time the mentality of it takes a village to raise a child. That is utter, absolute, non-Christian communism is what it is. It does not take a village or a community to raise a child. It takes parents. It takes a family. And family needs to come first. Before school, before sports, before so many other things. So it is a huge role God has given you as parents in the raising of your children. And Luther will talk more, in fact, about that as we go. 150, paragraph 150. The same may be said of obedience to the civil government, which, as we have said, is to be classed with the estate of fatherhood, the most comprehensive of all relations. In this case, a man is father not of a single family, but of as many people as he has inhabitants, citizens, or subjects. Through civil rulers, as through our own parents, God gives us food, house, and home protection and security. Therefore, since they bear his name and title with all honor as their chief glory, it is our duty and honor to magnify them as the most precious treasure and jewel on earth. So we confer parental authority to civil government. And when we do that, we, in a sense, bind ourselves to them within reason, right up until the point they start telling us to sin. So even if civil government seems to be heavy-handed at times, under the fourth commandment, we have a duty to obey. And the only reason we ever can abrogate that duty and disobey is the same as with our normal parents. If they are teaching us to do something contrary to God's word, then we have a right and a duty to disobey. Otherwise, if it's just we don't like it, that's not an excuse. So even oppressive government, unless it's telling us specifically to sin, we are bound to honor and obey. That doesn't mean we can't work to change it at the same time. We don't have to agree with it. We don't have to like it. We have tremendous freedoms in this country to disagree with it, and we have every right to do so, but to disagree with it still while maintaining honor and obedience. I'm not a fan of Barack Obama, but there is a line to be crossed between attacking the man, finding fault with the man, and as an American citizen, exercising our free speech and saying what it is we don't particularly like. There are things in his policy that I think are just plain anti-Christian. But nonetheless, you won't hear me use the pulpit to run him down as an individual or show dishonor or disrespect to him as a person. So we need to maintain a fourth commandment relationship to government with honor and respect even while we are disagreeing. And that's something our world can't wrap its head around. Most of the, if you ever watch political pundits and making jokes and things like that about our leaders and laughing it up about them, that is not Christian. That is not in keeping with the fourth commandment to mock people and laugh at them, even our leaders. So disagree all you want within the bounds of the fourth commandment. You are free to disobey when it's a law that tells us to sin. And we are approaching that. Our government has overstepped its bounds and is telling us to sin, dictating health laws now that demand abortion. We have every right to disobey that. All right? Comments? Paragraphs 154 and 55. 154, why do you think is the world now so full of unfaithfulness, shame, misery, and murder? It is because everyone wishes to be his own master. Be free from all authority, care nothing for anyone, and do whatever he pleases. So God punishes one knave by means of another. When you defraud or despise your master, another person comes along and treats you likewise. Indeed, in your own household you must suffer 10 times as much wrong from your own wife, children, or servants. Of course, we keenly feel our misfortune, and we grumble and complain of unfaithfulness, violence, and injustice, but we're unwilling to see that we ourselves are knaves who have roundly deserved punishment, and that we are not one bit improved by it. We spurn favor and happiness, therefore. It is only fair that we have nothing but unhappiness without mercy. He's very passionate about the social condition of the world around him, and the fact that there is such unrest and problems in the world, he blames on family, first and foremost. And man, when you see what's happening in schools these days with discipline and why teachers just plain leave because they don't want to be teachers and have to deal with kids abusing them and not be able to discipline them, the root problem is family. Dana works with special needs kids sometimes. I know Jason does. So many of those kids wouldn't be special needs if they had normal families. They come from horrible family situations, and it takes an immense toll on kids and on society. In fact, this is one of the arguments. One of the arguments against gay marriage and gay parents. The study that was done that the homosexuals hate and deride and call every name in the book and try and find any fault with it they can. A study by a guy named Regnerus, social scientist. And his study did show, after canvassing thousands of families made up of everything from gay and lesbian parents to single moms to divorce situations to both biological parents present, looked at the children and what the impact of those family settings were on children. By far and away, the children with the most problems in life, who claimed to be subject to sexual abuse as children, who required the most therapy as adults, who were themselves in broken relationships, all came from households where, well, the worst cases were the lesbian moms, and the next worst down were the gay fathers, and the next worst down were single moms. Where the family is not whole, the children suffer. That's statistically, socially provable. It's just so essential in a home to have stability for the sake of family. That fourth commandment thing is huge. So this complaint of Luther's that the reason we have so much chaos and problems in the world around us is because families are broken, he's absolutely right. It's within, and this is the argument when you deal with homosexual people who want to, or people for that matter who don't have a problem with gay marriage, who want to say that, well, they can do their thing, it doesn't affect me, as long as they're not affecting me. Well, that's the thing, it does. It does because it affects all of society. Gay parents raise children more prone to social problems, more likely to have to be in therapy, more likely to have to be in need of clinical and possibly even police help. They're more apt to get in trouble. Socially, they create problems more often than stable biological families. So it's within the social good to say that's not a good atmosphere in which to raise children, and society's not going to support it with law. We follow, in this government, we don't follow Christian law. We follow natural law. And the one basic natural law is people ought to pursue good and avoid the bad. It's as basic and common sense as it gets. Pursue the good, avoid the bad. And if something can be shown to be bad for society, then natural law would dictate that the government has a vested interest in it so that it doesn't become a bad thing for society. And there are all kinds of laws governing sexuality. You can't marry your cousin or a blood relative. Why? Because it's in the social best interest that that could create children with problems. You have to be a certain age in order to be married. Why? Because marrying at too young an age can, again, create a burden on society and social problems. It costs the government a fortune to take care of broken kids. All the government policies, the school policies, somebody pays for that. It's us. Polygamy right now is illegal. Why? Again, social best interest, because polygamous situations create difficult families that have problems. Government has historically supported the male-female biological family unit because it's the most stable, less costly environment for the raising of children and for a stable society. When we break family, you break society. So don't think for a second that the gay marriage laws that are now in place aren't going to hurt society. They will. In finances, immediately. The amount of extra medical bills it takes to pay for homosexuality is staggering, particularly male homosexuality. Gay men have a 4-time greater rate of parasitic infestation than heterosexuals. It's something like a 20 times greater likelihood of hepatitis. The cost to society to support homosexuality is huge. And homosexuality represents the violation of the fourth commandment, the breakdown of family. So honor father and mother has far-reaching repercussions for all of society, and when that breaks down, everything goes with it. Any thoughts? All right. 158 to 163. Thus we have 3 kinds of fathers presented in this commandment. Fathers by blood, fathers of a household, and fathers of the nation. Besides these, there are also spiritual fathers, not like those in the papacy who apply this title to themselves, but perform no fatherly office. By the way, the word pope comes from the Latin papa. Literally means father. So pope means father. And what do you call Catholic priests? Father. Rome has adopted the title of father for the priesthood, which isn't necessarily wrong as long as they act like fathers. For the name spiritual father belongs only to those who govern and guide us by the word of God. St. Paul boasts that he is a father in 1 Corinthians, where he says, I became your father in Christ Jesus through the gospel. Since such persons are fathers, they are entitled to honor even above all others. But they very seldom receive it, for the world's way of honoring them is to harry them out of the country and grudge them as much as a piece of bread. In short, as St. Paul says, they must be the refuse of the world and every man's offscouring. Yet there is need to impress upon the common people that they who would bear the name of Christians owe it to God to show double honor to those who watch over their souls and treat them well and make provision for them. God will adequately recompense those who do so and will not let them suffer want. But here everybody resists and rebels. All are afraid that their bellies will suffer, and therefore they cannot now support one good preacher, although in the past they filled 10 fat paunches. For this we deserve to have God deprive us of his word and blessing, and once again allow preachers of lies to arise and lead us to the devil, and wring sweat and blood out of us besides. He's pretty passionate about that. And my comment on the handout is, this is an issue some congregations have. It is not a problem here. You're very generous in taking care of your pastor. But there are those who, in order to get rid of a pastor, will simply starve him out of office. I've had a couple of situations I've had to deal with that in this district, of congregations that don't like their pastor, but they don't have biblical grounds to get rid of him, so the best way to get rid of him, starve him out. Cut his salary, complain that the bills aren't being paid, so instead of giving more to pay him, just slash his salary so that they can pay the church bills. The money is there, they just don't want to give it to him. That stuff does happen. I've got a friend, in fact, who's 30 years in the ministry, and right now I don't think he's even making what a first-year pastor is supposed to be making salary-wise. There are awful things some congregations do. And it's not because they don't have the numbers, the people. They just don't see the need to take care of their pastor. All right, 167 to 69. In addition, it would be well to preach to parents on the nature of their office, how they should treat those committed to their authority. Although the duty of superiors is not explicitly stated in the Ten Commandments, it is frequently dealt with in many other passages of Scripture, and God intends it to be included in this commandment in which he speaks of father and mother. God does not want to have knaves or tyrants in this office and responsibility, nor does he assign them this honor, that is, power and authority to govern, merely to receive homage. Parents should consider that they owe obedience to God, and that above all they should earnestly and faithfully discharge the duties of their office, not only to provide for the material support of their children, servants, subjects, etc., but especially to bring them up to the praise and honor of God. Therefore, do not imagine that the parental office is a matter of your pleasure and whim. It is a strict commandment and injunction of God who holds you accountable for it. The number one job of being a father or a mother is teaching the faith to the children. Doesn't matter if your kids don't have the fanciest clothes. Doesn't matter what kind of house you live in. What matters is, are you teaching the faith to your children? And God will, as Luther says, hold accountable parents who neglect that, even if they provide very well in every other way for their children. If they haven't taught the faith to their children and they raise little atheists or little unbelievers, God will hold them accountable, is Luther's point. Parents, I think, don't always take that seriously. And as a note is there too, that means the parents also have to live their faith, because children learn more by example but than by word sometimes. All right, last bit. 170 to 174. The trouble is that no one perceives or heeds this. Everybody acts as if God gave us children for our pleasure and amusement, gave us servants merely to put them to work like cows or asses, and gave us subjects to treat them as we please, as if it were no concern of ours what they learn or how they live. No one is willing to see that this is the command of the divine majesty, who will solemnly call us to account and punish us for its neglect. Nor is it recognized how very necessary it is to devote serious attention to the young. If we want qualified and capable men for both civil and spiritual leadership, we must spare no effort, time, and expense in teaching and educating our children to serve God and mankind. We must not think only of amassing money and property for them. God can provide for them and make them rich without our help, and indeed he does daily. But he has given and entrusted children to us with the command that we train and govern them according to his will. Otherwise, God would have no need of father and mother. Therefore, let everybody know that it is his chief duty, on pain of losing divine grace, to bring up his children in the fear and knowledge of God. And if they are gifted, to give them opportunity to learn and study, so that they may be of service wherever they are needed. Yeah, he can't be any clearer about that. And finally, 176 and 77. I think what deadly harm you do when you're negligent in this respect and fail to bring up your children to usefulness and piety. You bring upon yourself sin and wrath, thus earning hell by the way you have reared your own children, no matter how devout and holy you may be in other respects. Because this commandment is disregarded, God terribly punishes the world. Hence, there is no longer any civil order, peace, or respect for authority. We all complain about the state of things, but we do not see that it's our own fault because of the way we train them. We have unruly and disobedient subjects. Written in the 1500s. Imagine what he'd write if he saw the world today. So when does this parenthood thing end? You have kids. Let's say you have several daughters. At what point does your parenting of them end? Never. At what point does their obedience to their parents end? Never. But it changes. it does change. It was mentioned last time about marriage. When there's marriage, then husband shall leave father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. There's a change in the relationship then, and an establishment of a new family in a new home. And still, though, there has to be respect and honor shown parents, even by the new family. But that doesn't necessarily, again, mean that new family is bound and subject to every whim and wish of a parent like they were when they were 3 and 4 years old. Parents also need to respect the fact their children are adults and back off somewhat. They have to let them live their own lives. So parents will continue to love and support. Children will continue to respect. And that's lifelong. Even if mom and dad have some serious problems. And the old parental thing of telling your kid to do something, they say, why? And because I told you so. That may not be the best approach either in light of what Luther says. Instead of I told you so, it should be because the fourth commandment tells you to obey. Because it's your service to God to obey. Let children know they're serving God by being obedient children. This is how they live out their Christianity. It's for His sake, not for your sake because I told you so. It's because God says you should obey. All right, any thoughts or questions or comments? This is one of the longest commandments in the large catechism for Luther. He spends more time on the fourth commandment than any other commandment, which says something. It was that important. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In today's world, at the risk of stepping on toes, which heaven knows I would never do, there's very little regard for the amount of lasting development in a child at very young ages. So parents that let their kids be raised by daycare, that is not the same as a mother raising her children at home. That influence at that age is so incredibly formative for a kid's overall development as an adult that parents don't realize how truly much power God has given them to shape a life and to shape an influence on society. That when parents do just kind of turn the kids over to daycare and pick them up for a few hours at night where they sleep at home and let somebody else essentially raise their kid, that is, again, I think, not what God would have in the fourth commandment. Money is a lot less important than raising a child in the faith and hands-on teaching them what it means to be a responsible adult. So it's worth setting career aside for a time for the sake of a child's life. Nobody can raise a child as well as the parents. Any other comments? All right. And again, recognizing that sometimes the brokenness of our world makes certain things more necessary. The brokenness of the model of marriage these days, the high rate of single moms, the deadbeat dads who have nothing to do with their family. That creates horrible, horrible problems for the fourth commandment and for children. Sometimes it's unavoidable that we have to put kids in daycare. Or, I'm not saying daycare is wrong or sinful. I'm just saying that it creates problems for society when there's a mindset that we're going to let daycare raise our children, which does happen sometimes. But the brokenness of the world makes it very difficult. And overall, how do you teach a kid whose dad is totally absent from her life, doesn't care, maybe gives a support check, maybe doesn't? How do you teach a kid like that about the fatherhood of God? They come to church and say the creed, I believe in God the Father. Well, what kind of image does that conjure in that child's mind? A distant God who has nothing to do with me? Fatherhood is huge. And actually, fatherhood, more than motherhood, has an impact on the spiritual life of a child. They have done studies on single-parent homes and dual-parent homes. In those homes where both parents go to church faithfully, the child is much more likely to go to church faithfully when they're older. When it's only the mother who goes to church, if dad doesn't have anything to do with church, or dad isn't in the picture anymore, the child is like double or triple, won't go to church when they're older. When the father goes to church and mom stays home, a child is much more likely to grow up and go to church. There's something, again, undefinable about the leadership of fatherhood and spiritual life that has a lasting impact on children's perception of church and their relationship to church. If church is perceived, especially by young boys, if church is perceived as mom's thing, as a womanly thing, the child will grow and lose interest in church. If church is perceived as a manly thing, as something the father is concerned with and sees as a genuine need, the likelihood of that child respecting church when they're older is much higher. Again, I don't know exactly why, but statistics, it's provable. The breakdown of fatherhood in our culture is going to do nothing but harm our society and ruin kids' souls. So, girls, when you choose husbands, choose them wisely as people who will lead in faith, not just because they're adorable. All right. Fifth commandment. And, you compare size-wise, front and back sheet of paper, fifth commandment, compared to fourth commandment. On the handout, first of all, note the order of the commandments and what this says of priorities. And that's easy to pass by and not really see, but it's there. The commandments start out with our relationship to God, 1 through 3. Commandments 1 through 3. Have no other gods, don't take his name in vain, keep the Sabbath day holy. It immediately goes from God to family and parenthood. Honor your father and mother. The first, most basic human relationship is first in line, father and mother. Then it goes to our neighbor, to those around us. Don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, all directed at those around us. Only then, in the fourth priority, are our own hearts and thoughts addressed. Don't covet. So the priority in the numbering of the commandments itself says something of priority in our life. God, family, others, and finally self. So fifth commandment is the first in the kind of third section now dealing with others around us. The second commandment in the second table of the law. On the handout then, the fifth commandment does not make all taking of human life wrong, only private or vigilante taking of life. The right of governments to defend the populace by waging war and punishing notorious criminals is not affected by the fifth commandment. By placing capital punishment in the hands of government, God removes raw emotions and knee-jerk retaliation from civil punishment. So on Luther's large catechism sheet then, you shall not kill. We have now dealt with both a spiritual and civil government, that is, divine and paternal authority and obedience. In this commandment, we leave our own house and go out among our neighbors to learn how we should conduct ourselves individually toward our fellow men. Therefore, neither God nor the government is included in this commandment, yet their right to take human life is not abrogated. God has delegated his authority of punishing evildoers to civil magistrates in place of parents. In early times, as we read in Moses, parents had to bring their own children to judgment and sentence them to death. Therefore, what is forbidden here applies to private individuals, not to governments. So even though there's a commandment, don't kill, that does not in any way do away with capital punishment. The government can still kill. Romans 13, 1-7. We have them. Romans 13, 1-7, remembering the context of Romans. Paul, writing to Christians living in Rome with a history of some of the most godless, vicious, self-serving rulers on the face of the earth. And when Paul wrote this, Nero was the Caesar, who was inhuman, a monster beyond description. A guy who had incest with his mother and his sisters, killed his father, raped children, homosexual, married to another guy, married to two other guys, in fact. Rape was a game for Nero. Tying children to stakes, he would dress in animal skins and be brought in front of them in a cage where he would carry on like animal to terrify the children tied to the stake. And then he would burst out of the cage and rape and murder them. He loved watching children be in utter horror and terror. Can you imagine a human being like that? He was a monster above monsters. And then what he did to Christians is no better. He hated Christianity with a passion. That's the guy who was in charge when Paul wrote this. And don't think Paul was ignorant either. Paul was a very savvy guy who was a Roman citizen who knew what the Roman Caesars were like. Nero isn't the first one. Caligula was before Nero, and he was just as bad, if not worse. So Paul knew what he was saying when he said this about the Roman government. Romans 13, 1-7. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what's good, and you'll have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore, you must be subject not only because of wrath, but also for conscience' sake. Because of this, you pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render, therefore, to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. He knew what the Caesars were like, and he said, they are God's ministers to you, appointed by God. How can he say that, knowing what a monster the Caesars were. Because he didn't look at the man, he looked at the office. The office of government leadership is a noble office, even if the man occupying it is a monster. He didn't lose sight of the God-given role of government office, which is to take care of people and protect citizens. And even if that office is being abused, the basic concept of it is intact. Fortunately, society had a way of dealing with Neros. Killed him. Nero was murdered. Thank goodness. Actually, Nero killed himself. He committed suicide because all of society turned against him, and they were actually hunting him at the time to kill him. And rather than let them kill him, Nero ran off with his gay lovers and cut his own throat. And because his gay lover helped him cut his throat, when the people finally found Nero and his gay lover, they killed the gay lover for helping Nero kill himself. But a lot of the other Caesars were murdered by their people or children. So, the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, does tie into government and government having the right to kill. The irony is, Paul says they don't bear the sword in vain. That's the killing part. That's the capital punishment part. That's how they kill. The irony is, Paul will himself be killed by the sword because of an order of Nero. So what he says, he actually practices to the point of giving his own life. And I am convinced that when Paul, remember, Paul was arrested. At this point, he wrote the Romans. He was under arrest. When Paul was arrested by the Jews, he was dragged before a Roman governor. The Roman governor gave him a choice. You're a Jew, appeal this to the Jewish authorities and argue your case there. Or appeal it to the Roman authorities and argue your case there. Paul chose the Roman authorities. It's mind-boggling because he knew what the Roman authorities were like and how much they hated his message. He had less of a chance surviving defending himself against Roman authorities than he had if he'd have picked the Jewish authorities. When he said that he appeals to Caesar, as a Roman citizen, he had a right to do that the Jews didn't. When he said that, he knew he was signing his own death sentence. He knew he wouldn't survive it. So why'd he do it? I think he did it because he felt that proclaiming Christ in front of Rome would be a better way for the world to hear of Christ than if he just proclaimed Christ in front of the Jews, who already had Christ and killed him. This was his way to spread the gospel, even though he knew he was going to die at the end of it. It's an amazing thing. What a courageous guy he was, brave, to know he's choosing death. Christians were, as they were killed by the Romans, it was noted by certain Roman governors, in fact, that the Christians are actually pretty good citizens. We've got a copy of a letter written by one Roman governor to a Caesar saying, what do I do with these Christians? And then he went on basically to say, they're not bad citizens. They promise that they're going to obey government, and they're going to pay taxes and do their duties and not steal and not defraud. So in terms of citizens, they're pretty good citizens, but they won't bow the knee to Caesar. So what do I do with them? And Caesar's response was, kill them. If they don't bow the knee to me, kill them. So it didn't matter what kind of citizens they were. All right, it's kind of enough, I think, time-wise. Any thoughts so far? Note the kind of underlying message in the commandments, and that is following them will very likely put us at odds with the world around us. This is hard to obey the commandments in a society that has no respect for them, in a culture that's essentially trying to divest itself of God. The more godless our culture becomes, the more difficult it is to follow the commandments. So we are setting ourselves up here for a hard life with these commandments, and yet we follow them for God's sake, and only God's sake. All right, let's close. Merciful Father, we pray for strength in this world and for help in obeying your commands, and confess that we do indeed break them, but we pray nonetheless that you might give us wisdom and understanding from your word and direct us evermore to walk in your